Amy Winehouse burned so brightly, so briefly, a voice that made you stop whatever you were doing and just listen. Toby Keith built a career on his own terms, uncompromising, proudly American, an artist who never chased approval. Bob Marley turned music into a movement. His legacy doesn't age. Bob Saget, beloved by a generation, warmer off-screen than the world even knew. Coolio gave us Gangster's Paradise and a career that proved street poetry could top the charts. Raquel Welch redefined what a screen presence could be: beauty, power, and total command of a room. Some people simply occupy a different level of fame. They become permanent. Picture a soundstage in Los Angeles, sometime in the mid-1990s. The cameras aren't rolling yet. A young actor sits in a folding chair, script pages balanced on his knee, jaw set, eyes working through something private. Nobody is paying much attention to him yet, not in the way they soon will. Within 2 years, his face will be on every magazine cover on Earth. But right now, in this particular moment, he's still becoming. That actor is Brad Pitt, and the distance between that folding chair and global iconhood is one of the most carefully constructed, quietly disciplined journeys in the history of American cinema. William Bradley Pitt was born on December 18, 1963, in Shawnee, Oklahoma, and raised in Springfield, Missouri, about as far from Hollywood as a person can get, geographically and culturally. His father managed a trucking company. His mother was a school counselor. The family was Baptist, church-going, middle class in the truest sense. There was nothing in the landscape of Springfield that pointed toward what was coming. No industry, no agents, no obvious runway. What there was a kid who paid attention. Friends from those years remember Pitt as someone who noticed people, the way they moved, the way they deflected, the way they wore their confidence or hid their fear. He was popular without being performative, the kind of person rooms reorganized around without anyone quite knowing why. He joined the golf team. He was in a fraternity. He studied journalism at the University of Missouri. And then, 2 credits shy of graduating, he packed a car and drove west. He has never fully explained the decision in a way that satisfies interviewers. The closest he's come is something like, he just knew. Springfield was real and good, and not the place. Los Angeles was the place. He arrived in 1986 with almost no plan, supported himself driving strippers to parties in a giant chicken costume for a fast food chain, and started taking acting lessons. The early years were exactly what you'd expect and nothing you'd romanticize. He made his film debut in a tiny, uncredited role in 1987. He picked up walk-on appearances in soap operas. He shot a handful of forgettable television films. The parts were small, and the pay was modest, and the work was steady, in the way that building a craft is always steady, unglamorous, repetitive, necessary. His first real notice came in 1989, with a supporting role in the film Cutting Class. Not a great movie, not a career-defining moment, but it put his face on a screen in a way that lingered for casting directors. Then came 1991, Ridley Scott's Thelma and Louise. Pitt had maybe 15 minutes of screen time as J.D., a charming drifter who runs a scam on the protagonists. 15 minutes. The role had no arc, no redemption, no weight in the plot. What it had was Pitt, leaning against a motel doorframe, grinning in a way that suggested he knew exactly what he was doing and was enjoying every second of it. Audiences felt something shift. The cultural response to those 15 minutes was disproportionate, immediate, and in retrospect, a perfect preview of how Pitt would operate at his best, occupying a role so completely that the role expanded around him. He didn't just play JD, he made JD feel like the main character of a different, longer, better movie that didn't exist yet. What followed was a careful, considered escalation. He didn't take the first blockbuster offered. He took A River Runs Through It in 1992, Robert Redford's elegiac adaptation of Norman Maclean's novella. Pitt played Paul McLean, reckless, magnetic, doomed, and what he brought to it was more interior than his earlier work suggested he had. There's a scene on the river, fly fishing in the Montana light, where the camera just holds on him, and what's happening on his face is not performance. It's something quieter than that. Roger Ebert wrote that Pitt was one of those actors who can make you think he's actually thinking. He was. The mid-1990s were where the real construction happened. In 1994, he starred in Interview with the Vampire, a high-pressure production, famously troubled, in which he reportedly wanted to leave multiple times. He stayed. The film was a commercial success. More importantly, working alongside Tom Hanks's spiritual successor in terms of cultural goodwill and an actor of the caliber of Tom Cruise, sharpened Pitt in ways that were visible on screen. He came out of that production knowing something new about his own limitations, and more importantly, knowing how to treat them as starting points rather than ceilings. Then came 1995 and Seven. David Fincher's Seven is one of those films that rewired something in mainstream American cinema. Dark, methodical, punishing, with a climax that arrives like a blow to the chest. Pitt played Detective Mills, younger than his partner, angrier, less patient, operating on instinct rather than wisdom. The role asked him to be wrong. Not charming wrong, not forgivably wrong, but catastrophically, irreversibly wrong in a way the film uses as its final argument. It remains one of his finest performances, because playing a character whose righteousness becomes his destruction requires a specific vulnerability, a willingness to let the audience watch someone unspool. Pitt gave Fincher that. The collaboration between Brad Pitt and David Fincher is one of the defining creative partnerships of late 20th century American film. They would return to it. They always return to it. In 1996, Sleepers. In 1997, The Devil's Own. Neither a landmark, both useful. He was building range the way a climber builds altitude, methodically, without fanfare, consolidating each gain before reaching for the next. And then, 1999. Fight Club. Fight Club was, at the time of its release, a movie that confused and divided audiences and critics almost equally. It was stylistically aggressive, narratively slippery, philosophically provocative in ways that some people found electrifying and others found irresponsible. It made a modest amount of money at the box office and then, on home video, became something else entirely. Tyler Durden, the character Pitt plays in Fight Club, is not a hero. He's an idea, a seductive, dangerous, ultimately self-defeating idea about masculinity, freedom, and violence. Playing an idea is one of the hardest things an actor can do because ideas don't have psychology. They don't have interior lives. They have arguments. Pitt played Tyler Durden as if the argument were completely, unironically correct, and in doing so, made him one of the most discussed characters in American film. What Fight Club did for Brad Pitt's career was confirm that he was not going to be a conventional movie star. He was going to be something harder to categorize and considerably more interesting. The 2000s saw him build out that complexity in all directions. Snatch in 2000, one of the great delights of that era, Pitt, barely comprehensible as the bare-knuckle boxer Mickey, all chaos and energy and wild comic timing nobody had seen from him before. Ocean's 11 in 2001, Steven Soderbergh's slick, sunlit ensemble caper, in which Pitt played Rusty Ryan with a simplicity and ease that was actually a masterclass in restraint. Rusty is always eating. He is always the coolest person in the room. He makes neither of these things into a big deal. The Oceans franchise ran to 3 films and became something rare in Hollywood. A movie series people loved, not despite the fact that it was lighter than air, but because of it. Pitt understood that kind of film as completely as he understood Fincher's darkness. The range was real. Troy, in 2004, was big, expensive, and more mixed in reception. Pitt's Achilles was physical and committed, but the film around him struggled. It's the kind of movie that's easier to appreciate as an artifact now than it was to defend then. He gave it everything. The film gave back less. Mr. and Mrs. Smith, in 2005, was a different kind of cultural event, not for the film itself, which was a perfectly enjoyable action comedy, but for what surrounded it. The tabloid narrative that emerged from that production consumed enormous oxygen. Pitt handled it with less grace than he might have liked. The period that followed was personally complicated and publicly scrutinized in ways that were largely unfair to everyone involved, but that's the nature of the particular level of celebrity he inhabited. What's worth noting is what he did with his professional energy during those years, because the work didn't stop and it didn't coast. Babel, in 2006, Alejandro González Iñárritu's fragmented, devastating portrait of global disconnection. Pitt played a grieving father in Morocco, operating in a register of barely controlled panic. It's a smaller role than his billing suggested, and that was entirely the point. He was choosing to support rather than lead. The assassination of Jesse James by the coward Robert Ford in 2007 is, by nearly any measure, one of the finest films he has ever appeared in, and one of the most underappreciated American films of the 21st century. Pitt's Jesse James is mythic and paranoid and exhausted, a man so thoroughly converted into a legend that he can no longer remember who he was before the story started. Director Andrew Dominik shot it like a fever dream, slow and beautiful and uneasy, and Pitt matched every frame. The film was not a commercial success. It is now a benchmark. Burn After Reading in 2008, the Coen Brothers' anarchic farce, in which Pitt played Chad Feldheimer, possibly the dimmest character in any Coen Brothers film, which is saying something, with such guileless, unbothered commitment that he became one of the funniest things the Coens had ever put on screen. Inglourious Basterds, in 2009, Quentin Tarantino's alternate history of World War II. Pitt's Lieutenant Aldo Raine was broad and physical and completely in on the joke of itself, which is exactly what Tarantino needed. Not every role needs to be an excavation. Then 2011 and Moneyball. Moneyball is the Brad Pitt performance that most people who are not already his champions point to as the moment they understood what he was capable of. Director Bennett Miller, working from a script by Aaron Sorkin and Steven Zaillian, gave Pitt the role of Billy Beane, the Oakland Athletics general manager who upended baseball analytics and in doing so lost the thing he was trying to win anyway. What the role required was understatement. Beane is a man who processes loss by moving forward, who almost never lets you see the machinery behind his eyes. Pitt plays him in long pauses and averted gazes and single lines that carry the weight of whole scenes. He received an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. He didn't win. The fact that it was close says everything. The same year, The Tree of Life, Terrence Malick's cosmic meditation on memory, grief, and grace. Pitt played a father in 1950s Texas, a man of discipline and suppressed regret. It is one of the most interior performances of his career, operating mostly in glances and gestures, in the particular way a man holds a dinner table together through silence. The decade of the 2010s brought increasing focus on producing. Plan B Entertainment, the production company Pitt co-founded, had been quietly and consistently doing some of the most interesting work in Hollywood. The Departed. 12 Years a Slave, which won the Academy Award for Best Picture in 2014. Moonlight, which won in 2017. Selma. World War Z. These were not passion projects on the margins. Plan B was consistently in the room where the most important films of the era were being made. He remained, in front of the camera, someone worth watching. World War Z, in 2013, was a massive global production with a chaotic shoot that he had to will across the finish line. Fury, in 2014, was a tank warfare film that asked him to be brutal in a way that required real preparation. He was. And then came a personal period of real difficulty. His marriage to Angelina Jolie ended in 2016 under circumstances that were painful and prolonged, and inevitably very public. The years that followed were genuinely hard ones. He has spoken, with notable candor, about leaning on therapy, about working through alcohol dependency, about rebuilding a relationship with his own emotional life that had gone neglected for too long. What came out of that period creatively was some of his most assured work. Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, in 2019, Quentin Tarantino's love letter to a vanishing Los Angeles gave Pitt the role of Cliff Booth, stunt double, drifter, loyal friend, possibly a killer, almost certainly untroubled by the ambiguity. It is a role built on negative space, on what a man chooses not to say and not to explain. Pitt won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor. His acceptance speech was warm and funny, and didn't pretend the previous few years had been easy, which made it land harder. He was 55 years old. He had his Oscar, and in his remarks there was no sense of culmination, only someone who had figured out how to be present for his own life. The work has continued. Babylon in 2022, Damien Chazelle's sprawling, excessive, brilliant portrait of early Hollywood gave him a role that was partly mythic and partly a mirror. Bullet Train the same year, a kinetic action ensemble, showed him loose and sharp, and clearly having fun in the way that only someone with nothing to prove can afford to. He's announced projects, he's shown up at festivals, he's talked thoughtfully about architecture, which has become a genuine passion, and about his children, about whom he speaks carefully. He's continued to produce. Plan B remains active, remains ambitious. There is a version of Brad Pitt's story that frames him as a beautiful face that turned out to have depth, as though the beauty were the surprise and the depth was the exception. That version underestimates him and misses the point. The actual story is about a kid from Springfield who made a deliberate set of choices over 4 decades and mostly made the right ones, who chose Fincher over safer directors, who chose Moneyball over blockbusters, who chose to produce 12 Years a Slave when any number of easier paths were available, who chose, after some very public unraveling, to do the harder thing and rebuild rather than retreat. He has worked with Ridley Scott, David Fincher, the Coen Brothers, Terrence Malick, Andrew Dominik, Bennett Miller, Alejandro González Iñárritu, Steven Soderbergh, Quentin Tarantino. That roster is not an accident. It is a philosophy, and the philosophy is still generating work worth watching. Whatever the next chapter holds, and there will be one, Brad Pitt enters it with an Oscar, a body of work that has aged considerably better than most of his contemporaries, a production company that has shaped what serious American film looks like in this century, and the particular credibility of someone who survived enormous pressure and came out the other side with his instincts intact. The folding chair is long gone.